now it's time to prep this guitar body for binding. A lot of people think that binding is a sort of complicated or difficult task, but honestly, all of the issues that arise from binding, in my opinion, tend to come from the sides not being meticulously flat and square. So really, the best way to get good binding results is to focus your efforts here in the pre-binding preparation, that is, getting the sides meticulously flat and square. And by the way, just an extra point of clarification here, when I say flat and square, what I mean by square is relatively square, because you think about it, both the top and the back are radiused, so you don't really have a rectangular object to reference square off of, but you can still be square to both the top and the back in reference to the sort of hypothetical top and back that would exist if you didn't have a radius on it. And you can sort of eyeball what that plane looks like. And of course, the reason you want to be flat and square is because whatever system you're using to cut your binding channels, the bearing of that router bit or Dremel bit or whatever you're using, that bearing is going to ride against the sides, and it's going to translate any sort of out of squareness or out of flatness, any little divots or anything like that. It's going to translate that directly into the binding channel, which then later on will manifest itself as gaps in your binding. And so I wanted to make this individual episode here just to sort of emphasize that point and to show some of the ways or techniques that I use to get the sides flat and square. Primarily, I'm simply using a flat block, that is a block that I've checked with a straight edge to make sure that it's truly flat, and I'm sanding the bouts, that is the outside curves, with it, and I always make sure that that block bridges all the way across the sides. I'm not going to use the block in sort of a random, chaotic fashion where I just run around and target high spots. Rather, I'm just going to cover a large, broad area at any given time, keeping that block bridged all the way across the full width of the sides. Now, another tool you'll notice that I'm using here is a rolling pin sander in a drill press, and that is simply to get into the waist because the block can't get into that waist area. If you don't have a rolling pin sander, you can use a dowel wrapped in sandpaper. Just know that it takes a very long time when you're hand sanding like that, so the rolling pin sander is nice to speed things up in that area. And do be aware, if you are using the rolling pin sander, that it is easy to really mess up your sides if you're not careful with this and you don't know how to use it correctly. You always want to make sure the rolling pin sander is always moving, and you never want to just sit in one place for any amount of time because it will dig little undulations in the side that are then hard to get out. So always keep the rolling pin sander moving. Also, always want to make sure that you can feel that the rolling pin sander is referenced flat onto the sides. You don't want to have any sort of slight accidental tip in that sander. And so that really is a feel-based thing. You can feel when the when the full width of the rolling pin is referenced firmly against that side. Now, unfortunately for a cutaway guitar, the cutaway is a little too tight to effectively use the rolling pin sander in there, so I really just have to do it the hand sanding way, which just takes time. For a Florentine Cutaway, I use a mixture of a dowel wrapped in sandpaper, as you see here, and for the very ends of the cutaway, I go back to the flat block. And so the mixture of the flat block and the dowel seems to work well in this area. And lastly, since my binding tower jig also references off of the top and the back plate, I'm going to make sure that those plates are reasonably flat. I don't have to smooth it out and get rid of all the sanding scratches or anything like that, but if you have anything like spot of glue squeeze out that creates a little bump that the router would have to ride over, or sometimes you'll have a little step down from one half of the book matched pair being slightly thicker than the other. Those are all things that you want to sand out so that if you think about it, if you imagine where the router is going, You want to imagine that that router is going to have a smooth journey all the way across, and it's not going to encounter any hills or valleys. If you learned something here, please give this video a like and subscribe so you can be notified when I release a new DIY guitar making video every Friday. And if you want to really learn more, take one of my structured online courses at ericschaferguitars.com or register for a hands-on guitar building workshop here with me in Burnville, Pennsylvania.